Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Look at me, I'm managing to get 2 of my food prep videos done like 2 days apart, which is what I used to do all the time and have not managed in ages. So I decided that I was going to persevere and push through getting my notes done for another video and get this recorded. I find that I can't do the notes too far in advance, or then when I go to read them, because they're only dot pointed, when I go to read them, I forget what the footage is that goes with them, so I do need to do them kind of in sync. Eventually, hopefully, the plan is to be able to do the voiceovers with the video in front of me rather than having to type out the notes first. I'm lucky I've got a really good typing speed. So this video is part 5 of the May-June food prep planning and preserving. That my tiny little spiel, family of 8, we only shop every 6 to 8 weeks. I will try and remember to put a card in of the grocery haul that we most recently did, but I did forget in the last video, so don't quote me on it. And because we shop that time span and we shop about 3.5 hours away from home, I share on the channel videos of basically day in the lives of my kitchen. So this is basically how we prep, preserve, cook, can, all the food that I purchase to make sure that it lasts us through the whole 6-8 weeks, however long it's going to be. This one looks like it might be 9 weeks, so we're going to be stretching it a little bit there. So come along if you want to see more. There is plenty of videos. They all are numbered and dated, so like the current ones are May and that sort of thing, so they go through from each section. So there'll be a grocery haul or a supply run, as I like to call them, because I don't just do groceries on them. And then following that, there'll be all the videos that reference back to that supply run of what I purchased for eating and everything else on that supply run following through. I find it sort of similar, like I do tend to cook and purchase similar sort of things every month, but at the same time I like to mix up the food that we eat, and I like my food to be interesting. So there's always something new within each period which I am making, so that I spice up the food a little bit, because I get bored and I like my food to be interesting. There's also depends on, because we shop like that, we shop seasonally, so I get bulk from the fruit and veg, and some months, like currently broccoli is pretty good to come by because it's getting cooler, and then sometimes it's cabbages, sometimes it's apples, sometimes it's mushrooms. Whatever is available is what I buy in bulk. So there's also that added into it. I have a cat with me in the garden today, so I'm just watching him. He's chewing on the edge of a garden bed. There's nothing planted in here that will hurt him, but it's a bit odd. So he's sniffing at the comfrey and gonna have a little bit of a lick of it. So weird animals that go along with the children. So let's get into it. This video, as I said, it's about number 5. So I'll get the voiceover done, and then I'll come back and say goodbye at the end. So every now and again I like to try something new for breakfast, and some of my standard fare I just haven't been on top of doing. Like I really like English muffins with eggs and bacon and things like that, and bagels are the similar sort of thing, but both of them are normally an overnight proof sourdough, and I have been really neglectful of my sourdough currently. I sort of didn't get on top of it over the summertime, and then it cooled down and I haven't been able to get back into a routine. I do have sort of a bit of a plan to try and get on top of it again. I bought a container that I want to use as a DIY sort of a proofing box with a seedling heat mat and a rack and a thermostat, an Inkbird thermostat and things like that. So I'm trying to set that up, and then that way I can try and get my starter healthy and well fed, because I can get it done multiple times in a day if I can keep the temperatures right and get it really well fed and really bubbly, and then do my overnight proofs. We have got the fire going finally inside, so the inside temperatures are high enough to do an overnight proof for most things as well, but still getting there. In the meantime, I've been working with instant yeast. Most of my things have been just using instant yeast. I decided to give crumpets a go. I haven't had crumpets in many years. They're just too expensive for the quantity that we would need to feed our family, but also normally I'd use a toaster, and we don't have a toaster. I did some Googling, and apparently Warburtons is the best recipe out there to use. That's the one that I followed. I proofed my yeast, I used tepid water as per the instructions, and I used my Thermomix so that I could get lots and lots of air into the mix as well. I then put the bowl aside to rest for a while as per the instructions. I was honestly really skeptical of my ability to succeed with these. The batter didn't puff up like I expected it to, of a batter with yeast in it. The temperatures were kind of cool, and I had all these worries that it wasn't going to work out, but I powered ahead anyway, and what did I have to lose? Part of the reason that crumpets were decided on was that I was going to do pancakes or waffles like a normal sort of a baked breakfast, but they both require eggs, and we're in that season of minimal egg laying from the chooks, they're molting and things like that. And when I was googling around things to make without eggs, it turns out crumpet batter has no eggs. So I hadn't realised that, but it, you know, prompted me to give these a go. I did have some stainless steel crumpet rings, and I can't remember if I purchased these or if I had them on my wish list, which is unusual for me because I normally try and keep track. If anything comes from anyone, I keep the little slips and I make sure to mention it in the videos. But if you did buy this 6-pack for me, thank you very much, but otherwise I might have ordered them myself. I did put this post up on Facebook when I did get them because I was so impressed with how well I'd done, and it was suggested that I could use rings from my mason jars, except that I don't have a huge amount of surplus rings, but someone sent me some, so I've got this surplus of extra rings now, and I'm going to give that a go next time I make them as well. I greased them really well with ghee. The recipe says that if they're not non-stick, you need to rub them really well with butter, so I used ghee and coated them really well. I placed them in the cast iron pan and then used a measuring cup to try and get consistent amounts of batter. I did 1/3 of a cup initially, but felt that that filled them a little too high, so I went back to 1/4 of a cup for the rest. I was pleasantly surprised with all the little bubbles that started showing up on the surface, and the batter pulled away from the edges and it looked like it was working, which I was surprised. Within the recipe it states that if you feel like enough of your bubbles aren't popping, to just prick them with a skewer. So being that I was trying this recipe out for the first time and sort of just winging it, I did try that with some of them, but in the end I decided it was unnecessary. Enough were popping on their own. These first 3 were my test batch and they all turned out really well. As I was learning here, some of the footage is kind of spotty because I was just trying to figure things out as I went, but I show in another batch that I slipped them out of the rings and then put them face down briefly just to get some colour on the top, like I would if I'd put them in a toaster. The next batch I decided to try putting the lid on and seeing how it went. So I was looking to cook them just a little bit quicker because these are definitely a low and slow kind of cook. You want them cooked all the way through the middle, creating those bubbles on top without burning the bottom. And there's a bit of a toing and froing with the temp, getting it hot enough at the beginning to get, you know, create a base on it, but then not so hot that it's burning before you get the middle of them cooked. So I wondered if putting the lid on for a bit of the cook, like I do with English muffins, might work to speed up the whole process, being that I'm cooking for a lot of people. This was what the first lot looked like. I was so thrilled with how perfect they looked for a first go. Good colour, crispy bottoms, and when you split them in half, you can see all those vertical tunnels, which is the unique thing about crumpets, is those vertical tunnels that they create. So the experiment with the lid was not a good idea. It stopped the tops being able to have the bubbles because it sort of created a skin on the top of the crumpets before they had a chance. So there was less lift and less of those pretty tunnels through, though they were still quite edible. It also didn't really cut down on the cooking time very much, so it was a bit of a fail. I went back to the first method, but with a full pan for the next lot, and again I was so thrilled with how well they were turning out. The 1/4 cup of batter and well greased with ghee and low and slow cooking method made for beautiful looking crumpets. Most of them popped out of the ring super easy. There were a couple that got a bit stuck, but running a knife around the edge helped with that. I am thinking that Nuttalex and a bit of paper towel might be the best way to grease these though. The ghee was a little hit and miss trying to get it to stay on the rings and that, whereas if I had paper towel and Nuttalex I could give it a really nice coating on there. So I might give that a go for the next one. This was super well received and they tasted exactly how I remembered. When you drizzled the honey on it, it soaked through those and left bits on the plate even through the crunchy bottom. And they have that kind of, I want to say a rubbery texture, which is kind of odd to aim for. Like, why am I aiming for something that has a rubbery texture? But it was totally exactly how I remember crumpets being when you purchase them from the store. The ones that come in the yellow packet. I don't even know what brand they are. I haven't had crumpets in a really long time. But when I was younger, we used to buy them, use them, and cook them in the toaster. So they resembled exactly what I remembered store-bought crumpets for being. I will say though, I have made a couple more batches and none have been as successful as this batch as yet. So I need to figure out what I'm doing differently. I did try doubling the batter in one batch and I think I used 2 warmer water for another batch. Both left me with sort of basically just like pancakes. Totally not what I was looking for, but if I figure it out properly, I'll come back to you guys and let you know whatever I was doing that was not consistent enough to make it work. For dinner that night, we had one of our super simple ramen dishes. This one is a green curry based one. I always forget to film this, but appear to have filmed it in its entirety here so I can share it because I get asked about it all the time. The first thing I do is I cook off some garlic and ginger and some oil. I add some green curry paste and cook it off until it's aromatic. After that I add cabbage. This was 2 small womboks, I believe. I got a box of mixed not great cabbages, super cheap, from the fruit and veggie store, and have been using them accordingly. These were a bit wilty, a little bit soft, but still good for this kind of a dish because they're being cooked anyway. So I sliced it up nice and fine, added it to the pot to cook off and wilt down a little bit. Once that had cooked down a bit, I needed to add stock, except I don't currently have any on the shelf. I've been relying on some Vegeta and water for most things, which is very slack. I do have bones in the freezer that needs to be turned into stock. I just haven't got around to doing it and then canning it. So I added some of that and a tin of coconut cream. I then added some soy sauce, a bit more water to get the liquid quantity up, and juice of a lime. I add some fish sauce and a generous couple of spoonfuls of peanut butter. We just use the Skippy crunchy stuff because that's what we buy and it works perfectly fine. Use whatever you have as well. You could use almond butter or whatever too. It's about adding that texture to it, but also that nutty flavour. It thickens it up and all that sort of thing. Mix it all up till it all blends through and you've got a uniform kind of a sauce. I put some ramen noodles on to boil, brought a pot up to the pot of water up to boil, and just add the full 1 kilo pack. Now, these ramen noodles are only $3.10 a kilo at Coles, and they're Jinmailing brand, and they are something that I buy and use most months. I don't think I bought any for the most recent supply run because I had surplus from last trip, which is surprising because we tend to use them, especially in the colder months. We might cook a simple ramen up for lunch too, so we go through them fairly quickly. They are a really good price for the quantity and they have a really great texture. Now, the trick with ramen noodles is that every time the pot comes up to a boil, it will attempt to boil over and make a really big mess. Keep a jug of cool water on hand, and every time it hits that peak boil, just put a glug in to take it off the boil. I find you need to do that 3-4 times while cooking these to get them to that perfect consistency. If you preemptively do it, it makes it less of a drama when the pot looks like it's going to boil everywhere. I added a couple of handfuls of the cowboy candy marinated chicken thighs cut up nice and small into the cabbage mix. We generally use meat scantly in these sort of dishes. It's plenty filling without it, but it does add a nice texture and flavour to have it in there. So it was just like a 500 gram amount of the pre-cooked chicken thighs in that standard marinade, just sort of chopped up nice and fine and mixed through. We serve this really nice and wet. We just use tongs to put the noodles in the bowl and then ladle over the cabbage and the soup. It's kind of mildly spicy, it's very warming, and it's very filling. It's a favourite and it gets requested quite often. The next day we had the leftover ramen in the fridge. Now if you add the noodles to it and then you refrigerate it with the cabbage and everything else, it ends up really thick and kind of gluggy, which isn't a bad thing. It just means that you need to eat it slightly differently the next day. So it's kind of a different meal altogether, which is kind of neat. I like that. I like when a meal can be eaten one night and then the next day it can be repurposed into something that feels different. So I cooked up some flatbreads to have with it, and we had a combo of the flatbreads with the leftovers. The flatbread dough was my standard one. I've put up detailed instructions on my Patreon and it needs to go up on the website, but I make it many times a week for a myriad of variation of meals. Today's were quite small and thick. That way they had lots of structure to use to scoop the cabbage and curry mix onto them. I also made some of the French bread-esque type dough that I've been working on. The goal here, I think I've mentioned it before, is to get garlic bread sized loaves. Then with the roasted garlic and butter mix that I make, slicing and filling them, wrapping them with foil and having them in the freezer to throw in the barbecue or oven as a side or a part of a meal when I just need something easy and quick to add to things. I've been working on figuring out the sizes I want these, and since this batch I've managed to get some baguette pans from Amazon that are working. But this was still in testing mode. I split the dough into 4, pre-shaped and rested it, and then shaped it into a baguette-style loaf and placed it on a tray for the second proof. They definitely seem too big here, but again, I was just trial and erroring. I was just doing different methods with it to see if I could get to the end result that I was looking for. After they had proofed on the tray, I scored them. I'm trying a vertical score here rather than horizontal ones to see how the dough responded to that, and got them in the oven. I had a bunch of lime juice left from the limes I had still been working on from the last supply run, so I decided to make another one of my lime curd crumble cakes. I wanted to get the quantities just right to fill one of my cast iron roasting pans, because that's my preferred pan to use on the barbecue. It tolerates the bottom heat best. Some of my cake tins and brownie tins and stuff like that, everything burns in them because they're just too thin, and the bottom heat of the barbecue causes issues. So having things in the cast iron definitely works better. I made a big batch of my dairy-free lemon curd in the Thermomix, which was basically throwing everything in and turning it on and walking away, which is the beauty of a Thermomix. I used coconut oil instead of butter in mine, and it still has that same consistency, but the flavour is brighter, more tart, without that kind of mellowness that the butter imparts, because the coconut oil doesn't have that same depth of creaminess, I suppose. It's still creamy, but it's different. It's definitely brighter when I do lemon curd with coconut oil versus with a butter sauce. The colour of my chook eggs lend it to a really bright yellow too, which is lovely. This size batch basically fills 3 of the salsa jars, which is a nice large batch. They can be frozen or they can be used for various different things. Sometimes I just eat it, spread on things, so This is what the bread looked like once it was cooled a bit. The loaves obviously are a bit large for what I was after, but it was lovely and soft and super tasty. They spread a little more than I wanted as well. Oven spring, when uncovered in a barbecue kind of environment, is not the easiest thing in the world to attain, even if you're adding steam, because the barbecue has plenty of gaps and openings where everything escapes. I mixed up the slice base for the crumble cake. This is kind of a strange one. It isn't quite a slice, it isn't quite a cake. It gets pushed into the tray a bit like a slice, but once cooked it's kind of fluffier and more cake-like. Everyone really likes it, either with the lemon curd or with apple, or I want to try it with a bit of raspberry jam. I think would be really nice on there, a bit like a coconut slice type thing or a Vovo-esque type thing, but everyone really enjoys it. I got the quantity right for the base of the tray and then poured a whole jar of the curd over the top, spreading it out edge to edge. I then used the Thermomix to mix up a crumble top as well. I've used Nuttalex for this because it turns out we ended up with 3 2-kilo containers in the fridges because I bought more and I didn't need to. So I'm just using it as whatever. You could use ghee or coconut oil or butter. I'm just really using whatever I had surplus of in the moment. I sprinkled the crumble topping over the curd. Now this is a super basic crumble because that's what my family likes. I personally like some slivered almonds, or seeds, oats, coconut in mine, but I was going with what everyone else likes for this, which is basically your flour, sugar and fat. I sprinkled it all over the top of the slice, kind of clumpy for the best effect, and then put it in the oven to bake. I then used the smaller ice trays that Ethel sent me for the rest of the lime juice for the freezer. Just whatever I had. I had juiced the last of the limes, and after I'd made the lime curd, this is what was left. Put them in an ice tray to put in the freezer. After that, I pulled out one of the pork roasts. Now, I finished working on the chicken, so the next thing to work on is pork, because that tends to be the next thing to hit dates that needs to be used. I cut a nice sort of equally thick, uniform style piece off that I was going to use for a roast. I took the rind off, leaving a decent layer of fat behind on the piece, but taking the skin off. Depending on the purpose, depends on how much fat I leave behind. When I'm canning it, I want it fairly lean. When I'm mincing it, I want as much fat with the meat as possible. And when roasting, I want a nice layer of fat all over the top, but not an excessive amount. So depending on the purpose of what I'm cooking, depends on how much fat I leave behind when I take the skin off. Once I had all the rind off, I used the ties that come with the pork and just knocked them a little shorter to hold the roast back together, because these are rolled roasts because they're cheap. So they're not the best pieces, but they work really well in a myriad of ways so long as you treat them appropriately for what they are. I cut up the rind I had removed into sort of smallish squares and strips, and then used them over trays of the small red potatoes that I had put aside to roast as well. I buy a few bags of these small red washed potatoes, skin-on potatoes, from Costco every supply run because I like them for this purpose, the really nice small ones. So I filled a couple of trays with those potatoes and then put the skin over the top. As the pork skin renders its lard out, it'll be sucked up by the potatoes underneath, making for some of the most perfect roasted potatoes. Duck fat potatoes, lard potatoes, all that sort of thing roasted like that is it's just amazing. I put a layer on and then I spray with some oil and sprinkle with salt, and this will go in a nice hot oven or barbecue to quickly crisp up that rind, and then I'll turn it down lower so that the lard renders out into the tray underneath without burning the potatoes, preferably. The larger portion of the roast, I took the rind off as well, and I'm going to vacuum seal it up to go in the freezer. I'll be able to use this from frozen in the pressure cooker to make Kahlua pork or some other type of pulled pork for later on in the month. I experimented with that last month. I froze it in chunks and then stuck it straight in the pressure cooker frozen, and it worked beautifully. So this gives me the option to make, I could make the pulled pork and bag it up cooked in the freezer, which I have done previously, but it is always nice to have it fresh. Like, even it just, because the way we reheat things, that it is nice sometimes to have it freshly made. So by being able to put these chunks in frozen and cook it straight from frozen, I think that's a wonderful extra aspect that I'm doing. A bit like when I can buy the whole chickens and freeze them and cook them fresh, frozen fresh for dinner that night. It's just a nice thing to be able to do. The piece that I'm going to roast I prepared in my favourite way. I coated it with some Dijon mustard. Not only does that help with flavour, but it also helps to hold moisture in, and it gives the dry rub something to stick to. With clean dry hands, I sprinkle the rub over the roast and pat it in place. My rub is a mix of brown sugar, smoked paprika, onion and garlic powder, salt and pepper, whatever I happen to have that I want to use. It's just a basic mix that I really like. It's the same flavours that I use across so much of my cooking. The sugar in the rub for this particular one helps to like caramelize a little bit on the outside and gives it a bit of a crust, but it also helps to impart moisture as it's cooking as well. My favourite way to roast this is actually in the smoker, but my smoker died, and I have a charcoal one that I got given that I've been using on and off, but I forget to set it up, and the time required to get the charcoal going to then use it to cook inhibits using it spur of the moment. So I really need to get better at doing things like that, especially once we get the wood stove installed, because again, that's going to take time to get set up to use rather than just being able to click a pilot light and get a gas barbecue going. So I ended up just putting it over some of the potatoes in the barbecue because I don't have enough room in that barbecue to put 3 of those trays in. So one of the trays I put the pork over the top of, which is fine. I put the probe in it, and once it hits a certain temp, I'll probably foil it to keep it nice and moist in the barbecue type environment. In the smoker, it's not such a big deal. I can leave it open, but in the barbecue kind of thing, it does dry out if I don't put foil over it. This is what the lemon curd crumble cake looked like when it was done. It was a long bake at this size and thickness, probably about 50 minutes. Darryl took a piece as soon as it was sliced up and after I got a photo of it. Everyone loves this, so it is something that I should make more often, and I don't because I just forget. It's simple, and if I freeze the lemon curd, I can quickly warm it up and spread it out. Doesn't matter if it changes texture a little bit because it's going to be baked anyway, but the kids really liked it with apples off the shelf on it as well. And as I said, I'd really like to try like a raspberry jam or something on there too. I think that would be really nice. Add some coconut to the crumble raspberry jam underneath. That'd be tasty. I cook our pork roasts to 63 Celsius or 145 Fahrenheit, which is classed as medium rare. Pork is classified as a red meat, and therefore you can consume it at a lower temp, unlike, say, chicken, which has to get to 76 Celsius or 165 Fahrenheit to be safe to consume. Before I discovered this, I always cooked pork to similar temperatures as chicken, and they could be quite tough. Once you've only cooked it to the 63 point, you will realize how tender and fall apart that it can be. This is what it looks like when slicing it up. It's extremely moist, the texture is soft, and it's amazing. It is one of our favorite ways to eat the pork roasts. It is something that I don't always do because we eat far more meat in a roast style than if I was to mince it and use it in something else, because it becomes, as I've said before, when meat is the star of the meal, then you consume more per meal than if it is only a portion of the meal. I was a touch lazy that night and served it with some of the roast potatoes, some of that day's bread, and some gravy. We just had roast pork rolls with potato. I know we regularly eat vegetables throughout the day, and therefore dinner isn't as big a deal to skip some, but I always feel bad and kind of guilty if there's no green on the plate. So that was another couple of days of our kitchen and getting stuff done. So I've still got pork to do, I've still got the mince to do, and amongst many other things. So I've still got quite a few videos coming of what we've managed to get through everything, and I kept on experimenting with that bread. I've got some really good versions of it now. I'll try and put a photo in here of the shape that I'm looking for. So we're definitely getting there with that. I haven't made that lemon curd cake again. I've been going through all this effort to get the ratios right to fit it in that slice tray, and then I haven't made it again. So this is just reminding me that I should bake one. I did get a Ninja Creamy for my birthday / Mother's Day. I bought it for myself and I posted that on Facebook as well. And so I've been doing a lot of ice cream. So probably that's been my focus of sweet stuff lately. So that'll be shared along in the next few videos as well, as I figure out what works for us and what we like the flavour of, and cooked custards versus like the protein style ones and all that sort of thing. So I'll be sharing that as I go too. But yeah, so that was another couple of days in my kitchen, in my off-grid kitchen here with our family of 8. And I will see you guys again on the next video. Bye guys.